Hello, and welcome to Affirming Infinity, the podcast where we talk about all things voice and the wonderful infinite ways in which we can experiment and express ourselves and all of the fun, nerdy, technical stuff behind that. I am your host, Karen Wilcox, and I am here today with Shanelle Woods, Jonathan Lacayo, and Tara Priolo. So before we get started, I'd like you guys to introduce yourselves. We are all voice teachers. We are all in one way, shape, or form engaged both in teaching and in performance, and have had a variety of experiences with that. So in 2 or 3 sentences, who are you? What is your background? What are you about? Shanelle, start us off.
Sure. Good morning/afternoon, everyone, wherever you are. My name is Shanelle Woods. I was previously teaching voice at the collegiate level at a couple of universities down in South Carolina. I have since relocated to New York, where I am on the staff of the Young People's Chorus of New York City. And with that, I teach voice lessons there as well. In all of my years of private studio teaching, I have done everything from classical to musical theater to contemporary pop, rock, jazz, whatever. I welcome all genres and styles and truly am just mostly interested in helping each student find their individual voice without putting any of my training on that. So yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah. Jonathan, who are you? What do you do? What are you about?
Hi, I'm Jonathan. I am an LA-based tenor slash voice teacher. I teach all over Los Angeles County. I sing with the LA Opera's outreach program, a Zarzuela project that focuses on teaching Spanish operetta, and I direct a music program at an Affirming church down in Long Beach, California.
Awesome. Very cool.
Oh, I do one more thing. I sing at a top 40s like dance band, and we like singing like dance venues around town too.
Very, very cool. Yeah, no, that is a very important point because again, what I really want to talk about today is how one says and one hears that if one studies classically, one should be able to do all of the genres. But we all know from personal experience that that's not always what happens. So we'll get into that more today. Tara, introduce yourself. Who are you? What's your background? What are you passionate about?
Hi, I'm Tara Priolo. I am a soprano located in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I have had my own studio for since I moved to the Twin Cities, so about 5 years ago, and have been in and out of teaching at other studios, but I primarily teach teenagers to young adults. That's and similar to Shanelle in all styles, everything from top to bottom, whatever they want to sing. And my philosophy is really about student-led, goal-oriented lessons and meeting the student where they are. And also, if you hear my dog moving, I'm sorry. I'm a dog owner. That's really what I'm about.
Worries.
I have 2 puppies. So if you hear them, that's what they are.
Very cool. We can't actually hear the puppies, which is good, but you are very quiet. We can still hear you, but is it possible to turn up your mic?
It is an internal mic, so I will do.
Yeah, it's telling me it's your earbuds. We won't worry about it. We can still understand you, and I can adjust stuff later. Just speak very clearly, as we all know how to do because we are all singers. All right, so today, what I want to talk about is the not often spoken about or referred to challenge of listening to vocal function over vocal aesthetic. And what I mean by this is every single other instrument out there, they have a very distinct sound. You can learn very quickly to hear whether a flute is playing well, whether the person playing the flute has good technique, whether they're creating a good tone. Same goes for just about every other instrument, even within the variances there are between instrument build and how that affects the resonance. The challenge with voice, though, is every single one of us has a different one. And so I would like to get started by talking about when you guys are getting to know a student for the first time and listening to their voice and thinking about, okay, what are we going to work on? What are you specifically listening for? regardless of technique, not regardless of technique, but regardless of style, vocal color. We're going to talk about what vocal color means, which is a very confusing term often used. But regardless of anything else that's going on, what do you guys listen for primarily? Shanelle, start us off.
Sure. Personal anecdote first. I know that in my own studies, I was often mistyped, I think, because as you know, as some people have studied and pointed out over the years, African American singers tend to have a darker, warmer quality to their voice. And so in hearing that without assessing my function, I think a lot of people heard that sound and they automatically assumed, oh, okay, this is a mezzo voice. It's meant to be very, very low in the register. And even, you know, like bucking against that from time to time, I felt like I was always sort of boxed into this is the part that you have to sing. And it honestly got to a point where it was uncomfortable. And I think if you are coming from a situation where you're sort of new to voice lessons, sometimes you automatically assume teacher's word is gold and you don't necessarily just question things the way that you should when you're just starting out. And so, yeah, I felt like I was constantly being forced to push my voice lower than it naturally wanted to go because it was assumed that that warmth equaled lower registration. And so in having that experience, I try not to put those same assumptions on my students. And so I tend to listen for the technical things in that first lesson. I always ask them to come in prepared to sing something that they know really well. Doesn't matter if it's classical or whatever, just bring in something that you are comfortable singing for me that you think is performance ready so that I can just hear where the gaps in the technique are. And then I'm going to have to sit down and have a conversation with them about where they want to go stylistically. So then it becomes a conversation about not me assuming what styles they want to study, but assessing what they want to do and what their goals are, and then talking about aesthetic vocabulary and nuances surrounding those styles. So it's really dictated by what they want to be able to do, and then having that dictionary of, okay, if they want to sing in this style, then that means that we need to check these things off the list. And if they want to do this route, then here's a list of adjectives for that. So I think it's more about having a teacher vocabulary to support that no matter where they want to go.
Yes, and you pointed out something very, very important that I hadn't actually thought about in preparation for this, an aesthetic vocabulary. We hear so many terms, especially in the classical voice world, thrown around. Dark color, or just find a different color, or create more. Twang is not used as often. But we hear all these words thrown around as common wisdom. But the thing is, unless you have actually really delved in depth and figured out what each of them functionally is, the term on its own, even if it has been standardized, so to speak, can be very confusing and misleading. Jonathan, I would like you to actually pick up there and talk about your own experiences there, sort of like Shanelle just did, in terms of how do you approach this with your students? How do you go about building that vocabulary? And is it the same from student to student, or does it differ from one student to the next?
Yes and no. So yeah, in some way, I want them to learn the language I'm gonna use with them first, and
Really
figure
quick.
out.
Sorry, there's something, I think the mic on your thing is I'm hearing a little friction going on consistently.
How about now?
That's better. All right.
Very cool.
So start that point again.
Sorry about that.
Sorry. No worries. Sorry about cutting you off right in the middle of the question. So how do you go about this with your students?
So, first, what I listen for is what they can naturally do on their own. Because a lot of people have this, or a lot of even children have a lot of natural instincts that haven't been unlearned yet by hearing how our culture speaks, or hearing how people speak. They just naturally, they're on their resonance, or they naturally know how to open up the throat so that there's so the larynx is low. A lot of things that they do naturally, and I try to go through that route, encourage that, and then build from there. And like Shanelle says, according to what their goals are, what type of style they want to accomplish. And then I teach them my vocabulary. This is let's build upon your resonance with the e vowel, or with the nya sound, and then we figure out how to how to understand that. And so I just do a couple of exercises that my teacher taught me when I first started learning how to sing, and we learn how to build upon that. And then as they master those two essentials, those two foundations, I add more vocabulary. Like, okay, like how was that? Was that? Did you feel your soft palate go out? Oh, I didn't think about that. Like, oh yeah, like once I hear they're doing something functionally right, I add upon them. Like, this is what you just did.
Very cool. Yeah, I heard you use another term that I want to use to segue into Tara's perspective on this. You talk about natural resonance. And this often is one of those terms that we throw around, which is most often referred to as natural vocal color. Like you talk about the color of someone's voice. I really like the term natural resonance. So I'm going to use that to bounce the ball on to Tara over here. How do you help your students to find their natural resonance? And what does the word natural resonance mean to you specifically in that context? And the same questions I threw at Shanelle and at Jonathan. How do you build a vocabulary? How do you build a rapport? What's your take on that?
Yeah, so I'll start kind of with my own experience because I think it plays into this natural resonance idea. And similar to Shanelle, I was mistyped like numerous times. I went from being a mezzo in undergrad because my teacher told me that there was something wrong with my high notes because they had color, essentially is the reason. And so I was put as a mezzo, even though my voice is incredibly brilliant. Like there's no reason for me to have been a mezzo. And then in grad school, I was deemed a highlight lyric coloratura soprano because of my height and because of my small stature. And I just don't have those notes. I don't live up there. I don't like to live up there. I don't like to go up there. And what I had to do to fit that fa was to cut off most of my natural resonance in the top, right? And how did I do that? I took away my breath, right? So I was really just singing from my chest up, and really straining with my throat. And so to me, natural resonance simply means the freedom of the voice, right? It's the ability for it to resonate where it's supposed to be, in the head, in the throat, on the bones, allowing that breath to move it through, right? So that's where I believe that it kind of, and you'll hear me say this, my students hear me say this all the time. So if they listen to this, they'll be like, yeah, Miss Tara always tells us the voice begins in the breath. Yes, it does. Absolutely. Take a breath, let it go. It doesn't matter. It's got to be free. So because of that struggle, and because it took me so many years to figure out where my voice was happy, like when I got out of grad school, I didn't even know where I liked singing. Like I didn't know if I liked singing low. I didn't know if I liked singing high. I didn't know if I liked the middle. I had no idea because I had changed so many times up and down. And I really went on kind of this full out force to be like, no, I don't want my students to ever feel that way. So I'm very against really using any kind of that like aesthetic terminology, especially because I'm teaching a lot of teenagers. So I don't like to be like, oh, that was really bright, or that was really dark, or that was, your voice has so much warmth, because I simply want them to know that wherever their voice is, that's good enough. That is enough. That is the best that they can do. But where I do insert like my vocabulary is into the functionality of the voice. So like Jonathan was saying, okay, hey, I heard that sound was more full to my ear. Did it sound that way to yours? And they'll be like, yes. And then I'll say, did you notice what you did? Right. And they'll be like, some of them are like, no. And some of them will be like, yeah, I did this and it felt this way. Right. So that's the way that I try to approach it. I usually try to stay away from like dubbing them into a color, because I do find that tends to like direct the repertoire that they want to go into, because then they'll like identify a voice that maybe sounds that way. So if you say, oh, your voice is bright, they might go, okay, then I can sing Tori Kelly, and that might not be true. Right. And then they only want to do that, and then they associate themselves as a bad singer because they can't sing that or something like that. So that's why I kind of go against that terminology, but I do think it's important to talk about as singers get older. I just happen to teach a younger demographic. And so that's why I kind of stray away from it.
Yeah, as I've been thinking about this for myself and just just assessing my own vocal journey, what Jonathan and you said about like doing things naturally as a kid, because you're just singing, you're having fun, you're doing what feels good, and what feels good more often than not is what is correct. The moment you decide to sing professionally though, a myriad of things can happen. There's all the psychological pressure that you start to put on yourself, first of all, which is a whole nother episode. But you do have to start getting to a point where you know exactly what you're doing and exactly why you're doing it, and have a higher degree of micro-mindfulness of all the moving parts. So on that note, I want to talk about, well, first of all, actually, Tara, I wanted to ask you, because you've been very open with me in our conversations. What all do you think went into your being mistyped as a voice type in college and throughout your master's, and the things that caused you to cut out whole sections of your resonance in an attempt to fit into a box, to fit into the correct box, as it were. Give us a little of your story there.
Yeah, sure. So, as I stated at the beginning, I'm in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I grew up in Nebraska. The Midwest they are very obsessed with like the choral sound. We're a very choral area as opposed to a soloistic sound. And that sound, the choral sound that they're going for, is typically like English boy choir sound. And so even if you listen closely to, for instance, one of the largest opera companies in the Midwest, Minnesota Opera, right? Their chorus actually tends to have a more straight sound, right? So that's what people are typically looking for in the Midwest. And I grew up in children's choirs. So that was the way I learned how to sing. I didn't have a voice teacher until I was 18 auditioning for colleges. So I remember I was sitting in choir, and it was a Saturday a.m. rehearsal from 9 a.m. to noon. And I remember the day that my vibrato came in and my director was like, you need to cut that out. Like, what is that? And I was like, I am 16. I don't know what to do. It's just here, and I had to figure that out. And so the way that I figured it out was to cut off my breath. So I was continuously learning that the sound that people wanted was the sound without my breath. Right. And that was the only way that I could create the sound that they wanted to hear, or that I assumed they wanted to hear. Right. And in addition to that, in my upbringing, because I was always very good at reading music, and this happens to a lot of kids, I think, and I have this discussion with countless kids in my studio. Just because you're singing alto doesn't mean you're a low voice. It just means you can read music and you can find harmony. Typically, that's what it means. And I push them to say, don't identify as an alto. That's just what you're singing. It's not, it's not the extent of your range. So I was singing alto an awful lot. I learned how to sing those low notes, even though it wasn't always natural. So now sometimes, even today, when I walk into a choral audition, the directors will be like, well, because I have a low E, usable low E that it's just there from all these years. And they'll be like, well, do you want to be a soprano or do you want to be an alto? And I'm like, well, I prefer soprano because it feels better there. And they'll be like, well, sing alto because you have so much color. So that was the next step, was like, well, because you have so much color, you should be singing lower, right? You should sing lower. And when I got to college after all of that, I didn't know how to support my high notes. And my teacher, instead of saying, well, let's train the whole voice, said, well, there's a problem with your high notes, so let's just not use them. Let's just not have you sing above an E. Very young teacher. It's fine. Took me years to get over, but that's what she did. So for 2 years of my life, I didn't sing above an E. And I'm talking like E5, like normal note for mezzos even too, I switched teachers because she left the school and we were messing around in my lesson. And that's when we discovered, oh, Tara has this weird upper extension that a mezzo shouldn't have. And he didn't know how to train me to do that. He didn't know how to be like, help me get up there or train my middle to be better, to help me get up there. And then again, I was facing this whole Midwest idea that's like, it should be very narrow and pure and straight tone and tiny on the top. And I couldn't do that. But then I went to grad school and they were like, well, you have a D6, you have an E6, let's train you up as a coloratura. Well, I had just spent 4 years being a mezzo, singing mostly lyric stuff. I don't know how to do coloratura. Nobody ever taught me to do that. I literally don't know. I didn't know how to train myself, right? And they wanted it very, very thin and small, which was just not something that I naturally did. And that teacher too really kind of took advantage of the way that I look, right? And I didn't say this at the beginning, but I am biracial. So I look very white. I present very white, but once I open my mouth, there's the reaction I most of the time get is, why is that sound coming out of that little girl's mouth? Why is it coming out of that little white girl? Right? And I'll be like, 'cause I'm half black. That's why, and this teacher just really didn't know what to do with it. And so she was just like, yeah, it's fine. It's fine that you're cutting off your breath. And I do remember having a conversation with her and I said, there's some piece. I don't remember what piece it was, but I said, I'm not going to damage my voice for you. I don't want to sing this. I'm going to go sing this other stuff.
Good for you.
And she was like, and she really, she took some opportunities away from me, and that's fine. That's okay. I'm still here today. So that was kind of my journey of trying to figure out my voice. And I finally, when I moved down to the Twin Cities, I'm working with a teacher who, really embraces the idea of just the freedom of the voice and just figuring out where it's happy and what it likes to do. And she's like, sing whatever you want until we find it. And we did. We found a couple pieces, and it wasn't mezzo. It's mostly, she calls me a Heldon soubrette, which is really just kind of gives me the leeway to kind of change up Fox whenever I want, which is nice. So that's where I'm at today. And I feel much better about my voice, and I just let it be. I just let that color happen on the top. But I also acknowledge that in Minnesota, that's a sound that people are like, why is this little 5'1" white girl singing that way? How does that happen? Right. So
yeah. It's very interesting. I noticed a few words that you used, which I want to get to in a second, so don't let me forget. But before, specifically, I heard you use the word, they wanted a very pure sound. And to me, that is very interesting, that taking the rich, dark color that many of us have in our voices, regardless of what our heritage is, that is somehow that you would call that the opposite of what was considered pure in that area. So I want to get to that idea in a second, because I pay a lot of attention to words. And so that strikes me as very interesting. But before we get to that, you talked about cutting off your breath. So it's time for a technical nerd moment. I would like Shanelle and Jonathan to talk about what is actually breath support, because this is another one of those things that is so often misunderstood. And and at least I remember a damaging idea that I absorbed somewhere. I'm not entirely sure why or where, but was that if you have a big voice, you have to support more. And the way that got interpreted in my mind was pushing my breath out, was tightening up my body. And it created a whole slew of physical just tension, and also, I believe, respiratory issues for several years. So what exactly does breath support mean? Shanelle, start us off.
Yeah, your example about pushing out air. I literally was just filming something earlier today in regards to this idea of pushing out the breath. I've been trying to post about breath this month on Instagram because I'm just finding that to be such an issue with singers. To this day, I still will have new students that say, well, I was just told to sing from the diaphragm. And I'm like, hold on. Let's talk about that phrase, the sing from the diaphragm. We got to talk about it. Let's break that down a little bit.
Another misunderstood one.
I just... Okay. And I suffered from that for years myself, even, right? Like, or hearing things like, well, you got this big phrase coming up, you got to tank up. And so then you're in this position of forcing all this air through your vocal folds or having taken in way too much air. Like I was overusing my breath for a long time and no one had ever bothered to tell me that, right? And I think sometimes we think of breath support as you're under supporting, you're under supporting, you're under supporting. And sometimes we don't talk about the opposite end of the spectrum when you're doing too much with the breath. So just for the listeners at home, let's talk about breath for a second, right? This idea of allowing air into the body, which is how I like to think of it, in that it's a gas, right? We don't have to do anything. It's passive. We are simply allowing air into our lung cavity, and allowing that air to be beneath the glottis and building up that subglottis pressure. And that in a slow, steady, measured sort of way, if we're talking about the Apogeo, as that air moves through the vocal folds, then we get that slow, steady vibration and a nice, clear, efficient tone. Whereas if we are under supporting or if we're over supporting, we might get something that's a little bit more aspirate or something that's more pressed on the other end. So I love SOVT exercises. Jonathan has probably heard me talk about this in the clubhouse rooms all the time, but I'm constantly, telling students, let's back up for a second and think about that backflow of pressure through the folds and how we're really using our air and how we don't have to help it into the body or out of the body by squeezing and causing undue stress on the core. But this is all a very passive process. I'm always saying to them, let's just breathe as though you would, like when you're talking to your friend. You're about to talk and have a conversation. Let's just think of breathing being that natural of a thing. Because I think sometimes we just have overcomplicated it within our field of study.
Yes. Before we keep going, you used two terms here, Apogee Breathing and SOVT. I will admit, now granted, I came through a math degree before going into opera professionally, so I didn't have this in my background, and I actually only recently found out what SOVT was or what it stood for. I knew what it was. A lot of things like you know what the thing is, but you don't know the word for it. Yeah. So can you define those two terms, Apogee Breathing and SOVT?
Yeah, so starting with the Apogee Breathing, that is this idea of singing on the breath. So when we think about breathing in our day-to-day, right, it's just that normal inhale, exhale phase of activity. As we are breathing in the Apogee sort of way, we're basically suspending that exhalation phase. I cannot talk today, but we're suspending that latter part of the cycle. So instead of just right and getting rid of all of the air at once, we're really engaging those core muscles and those abdominal muscles to make that phase last a little bit longer. It's what I like to refer to as a slow burn of the air. It's like, those gallows they used to use on fires where we're slowly getting rid of all the air versus doing it in one swift motion. So that's a very bel canto sort of technique as far as singing on the breath. The SOVT exercises.
Yeah, and I'm just going to throw in. So I'm just going to throw in there, just because this is something that my nerdy brain finds interesting. The Italian word appoggio literally means leaning. And you talk about like the pressure release. So we're literally leaning our breath up against our properly approximated vocal cords. The word for this in German is stützen, which kind of means the same thing. It means a lean or a support. So anyway, I just find the word nuances very interesting. So I had to throw that in there right there. Continue. SOVT.
Yeah, no, I love that. The idea of leaning into the breath. That analogy has always made more sense to me anyway. So I love that you added that. The SOVT is semi-occluded vocal tract, which I always say it's just a really long, fancy vocal way of saying your mouth is partially closed. And so there are several different exercises that we can do to work within the SOVT realm. And I will also add that these are great sort of vocal rehabilitation techniques as well. If you're someone that's constantly talking or singing and you need a way to warm up or reset or cool down after long periods of vocal activity, you can do exercises like this to reduce the amount of strain that you're putting on your vocal folds. And it's going to help equalize the pressure of air that's going through them as well. So you're still using the same intention, but without the taxation on the folds themselves. So anything like singing through a straw, singing on a hum, singing on V sounds, all of those things are great tools to use to sort of monitor that, how you're using that air. And for really checking in with their resonance too. I find that buzz really helpful for checking in with how I'm placing the sound, to use a less technical but standardized term.
Yeah, the whole idea of sound placement and doing something physically that actually helps helps you build your own self-perception as a singer and figure out which of those resonances really feels sweet. And then slowly opening up so that they can actually come out and reach the audience. Jonathan, we got a pretty darn thorough definition of breath support from Shanelle. I would like to hear, and it included the idea of well approximated vocal cords. So I would like you to talk about that. Another one of those things that is, I mean, there's more that we don't know about the voice than what we do know about the voice. But in terms of what we do know about the voice, what is this idea of vocal cord closure and why is it important?
So vocal cord closure is just bringing the cords together in their natural function. As Shanelle was stating, like I like to think about it as well. Like how do you function just by talking? Like when I'm talking, I'm not like, okay, now I'm gonna like talk like this, and so I like to approach it as something natural. But there's ways to kind of turn it on through the singing. So like closed vowels really bring that vocal cords together. One I love to use that my teacher introduced to me was like baby cries, which is just like full on just wah, like really accessing that chord, and that one, it can be used very musically, and you have like upper. So by chord closure, it's keeping the chords flapping together while moving them in pitch is what we're talking about in chord closure. And then as far as breath support, I feel like there's like two different schools of breath support. Like the people who want you to let the breath out like that, and then there's the people that want to like keep the breath tighter in. I myself personally see both of them being useful depending on what the student is doing. So if the student is aspirating too much, then we'll work on like doing exercises that tighten up the amount of breath that is being allowed, such as like singing through the straw, or if we don't have a straw anywhere, it's like just sing through your pencil, like make sure like the sound goes through the pencil, or just like that, like to like just let, if the singer's too tight and they won't let out any breath, it's like just let it out like that, and now sing through that functionality. So both, depending on the student, how you approach breath support, or depending on what the student is doing, is how I approach breath supports, because in my personal vocal journey, I've had to go through both as well.
Yeah, breath support and vocal cord closure, it's kind of the chicken and the egg question, like which one comes first and which one. And honestly, at the end of the day, both of them need to be working together. What comes to, and that's what it means then to be singing on your body, because when you have that lined up and your vocal cords are vibrating in an overtone constellation that fits with your bone structure, that fits with your body, your whole breath and body start resonating with that. Which is actually the next point that I kind of wanted to get to in all of this. And because it really plays into this whole idea of vocal color and some of the recent, I don't know whether to call it dysfunctions or trends, choose a more neutral term, trends that we've all talked about seeing in various parts of the opera world. And as Tara pointed out, a lot of it is regional in terms of like what the in vogue sound aesthetic is. But what are all of the things that play into what the color of our voices is? And what are some of the pitfalls that can happen? I'm just going to say it via stereotyping. The way I've experienced this myself is I am small. I am 5'6" or 7 and thin, and people don't expect the type of big sound that I produce to come out of me. And so what I have faced is a combination of people saying, oh, don't start that big, you have nowhere to go. So I try to start smaller, which of course then I do what Tara did, cut off my breath, which then gives me no place to go from there. Or I start squeezing my throat in an effort to not overwhelm whoever with my sound. So what are all of the, just on a, again, technical, nerdy level, what are all of the factors that go into what creates our resonance, and what do you guys listen for? Because if we're all listening as teachers for a customized sound from each of our students, which is essentially each of our students is going to have a slightly different overtone, contour, combination that is their own resonant sweet spot, which also then changes throughout their range. What are we listening for? What are the markers that come when we know that they've really hit that sweet spot? So 2-part question. What influences the color of our voices as far as we know? Again, we don't know more than we do know on this level, but what are you guys' theories? And how do you guys help your students to figure out when they've hit that sweet spot? Tara, start us off.
Maybe I'll start with the second half, which is how do I help my students find it? So typically, well, I guess I'll answer maybe both, which it's exactly what we've already been talking about, which is good breath support mixed with properly vibrating vocal cords, right? Allowing the voice to resonate in your head. So what makes a color is the structure of your face and your body, right? So literally, we all have a different facial structure, all 4 of us sitting here. But there are a couple things that we can look at someone. And this is where I think the opera industry really kind of goes incorrect, which is like a lot of times they're basing on body type. So thinness, height, those kind of things, as opposed to looking at a person's face, which is actually going to tell you a lot more about how large their voice is or how small their voice is, right? So if we're looking, like Karen, when I look at you, I see wide set cheeks. So that to me indicates that your voice is going to be a little bit larger, right? Or at least it's going to appear larger because you have more space to resonate right there. And it's the same thing with me. So even though I'm 5'1", my face is very wide. Therefore, my voice is probably going to resonate larger. It's going to be able to fill a larger space easier than perhaps someone with a thinner face or a thinner structure. So that's the creation of the sound is the combination of good breath support, properly vibrating vocal cords, as well as the structure, the bone structure of the face. That's what's creating a color. That's why all our voices are different, right? How I help my students find that is really more about, and this is funny because I was thinking about it when you said it and I was like, do I want to go in the really like nerdy voice teacher, or do I just want to say that like when I absolutely know when a student has found it? And really it's the emotional connection that I get with that sound. Like when I hear the sound, I'm like, I'll just start crying in a lesson. And my students are like, what did I do? And I'm like, you literally sang the most beautiful thing that I've heard you sing. And they're like, it wasn't that good. It was just like me being me. That's the point. It was you being you, right? And so I really try to get them to feel good in their voice. And the 2 questions I ask really, really consistently. And when they get frustrated, because again, I teach teenagers, so they, they're really hard on themselves. They just like, yes, as we get older, we know more things, but man, when they are 15, they are like, I need to be the next Billie Eilish tomorrow. And I'm like, no, you don't. It's okay. So I ask them, did you breathe? Did you breathe low? Did you sing the vowel? Did you sing the word? If you did that, then you sang. It's as simple as that, right? And then we can get further into it and say, okay, did you lean into that breath? Did it feel good, or did you grip in your throat? And I find that that's the most frequent one for teenagers because typically they're trying to create a sound that's larger than they are able to create at that age, right? So they're looking at singers like Idina Menzel, or, if they're classical singers, they're comparing themselves to me. I'm 15 years older than most of my students. Of course, you can't sound like me at 15. You can't do it. It's just not possible. So just bringing them back to, this is what your body does. Did you breathe in your body? Did you form that vowel in your throat and in your face? With your mouth? With your tongue? Good. Cool. That's where we're at. You know?
Yeah. You know, I'm really glad that you brought up the emotional connection, because I think, and in my conversations with each of you, we've talked about this, those vibrations that we're creating when we're really hooking into our natural resonance and getting in tune with ourselves, quite literally. That is possibly finding our voices and letting our voices express themselves in the fullest, most true way possible. It is one of the most vulnerable things that you can do. And this is where, to me, all the technical stuff and all of the science intersects with the psychological. Because if you have trauma in your body or in your mind, or associate certain vibrations with certain emotions that you have just tried to cut out of your life, or out of your expression rather, for your own emotional and sometimes physical safety, that then creates potentially a technical issue. And it tends to go one of two ways. Either, and I've experienced both of these things happening in my own life, either your voice, your singing voice, is a thing that no one can touch, or all of a sudden it's the thing that gets affected first with any of those things. So how do you guys, I'm going to turn the question back to Jonathan and Shanelle on that note. How do you guys help your students? And again, we know this depends on how old the student is and how much life they've seen and what background they come from. But how do you guys help them to not only embrace their full sound, but also to be okay expressing it, to be aware of the emotional impact that their own experiences can have on their voice, and how to have grace with themselves in all of this? What have you seen? What is your experience? What is your pedagogical philosophy, I guess, on this? Big question here. I'm going to turn it to Jonathan and then Shanelle.
Yeah, I try to make it like a journey that we're both taking, a journey to discover the voice, and I'm just like the guide, and almost like Tara said, like once you have that like aha moment, we just like look at each other, and we're like, oh my gosh, that was, how did that feel? Like, what was that? And they're like, that felt free, like my vibrato, and I was like, yes, that's so awesome. Um, and so, like in that process of discovering and making it an adventure, I think that that side helps them approach it with grace and approach it with like, because in adventures, like we're discovering, we don't know what happens if we turn that way, but let's find out, you know. And if that's scary, okay, let's go the other way, you know. Having that, even with my adult students, having that playful interaction seems to ease down the process. It's like we're just, yeah, it's playful, we're being kids. And I myself, uh I feel like I'm still on that journey every day, like, oh, that was interesting, I didn't know like I could connect my voice like that, and blah blah blah. And so I'm very vulnerable with them as well. I was like, oh, I was just struggling with that yesterday, like what is the soft palate? Like, and so I take them on my personal adventure as we're going on their personal adventure, and and the standard is let's explore. That's pretty much my standard. And if it's not being exploratory, if it's not being fun, if they're too, like, we redirect that way. Okay, if this song is not working out, let's sing something that you're having fun with. Let's sing, if it's like a classical student, I was like, oh, okay, you're not having fun with your 24 arias, let's sing some Disney. If it's like a pop student, I was like, let's sing that pop, because I myself went through that adventure too, where like if something wasn't working out, like my teacher would ask me, so like what style of music is working out for you right now? I was like I'm singing church right now. Okay, let's sing your tenor aria like as a gospel piece. Okay, you know, and just having fun with it, like not putting barriers. It's a world. I love the analogy that singing is its own world, and we're discovering it. So there is no barriers, there is no borders in this world. It's explorative and adventurous.
Very beautiful. Yeah, it's such a an ironic discipline that we have to keep in terms of being very precise, especially as a professional singer, which I know all of us sing professionally, being very precise, but at the same time giving ourselves room to play. Shanelle, I want you to add to that, and I want to come back now to what I mentioned earlier, just this interesting word of pure that Tara used earlier in describing the sound that was expected of her in her experience growing up where she did, that sort of boy choir sound, and the whole idea of, oh, if you mix color in, or if you mix anything other than that very specific straight sound, there's something impure about it. I mean, that seems to be the implication here. Shanelle, this might be a bit of a deep question, and I just want to give you freedom to explore it however you want. But what are your thoughts on that in terms of what you yourself have seen and experienced with your own voice, and in trying to find where you fit in this whole situation? In the whole classical world, we like to categorize ourselves and each other. But what are your thoughts on that? I'd just be really interested in hearing.
Yeah, I think Tara hit it on the head in talking about, how the facial structure can really affect the sounds that we're able to produce versus judging someone based on their body type or their appearance. And so in my own experience, I think that for a long time, because I don't have the typical high African American cheekbones, like I just don't. My face is very round. And so I think for a long time, people expected me to also have this big sound, which is something that I think I grew into, but it's not where I was at the time. And so I am trying to fit into the box that had been created for me, was probably over singing and like pushing a lot. And like there was a lot of tension. Or as one of the other panelists mentioned, like no one had really worked out the middle of my voice, because it was like they either treated me like someone who was supposed to sing really high because they noticed the upper extension, or they heard that warmth and the color and thought, okay, well, you're supposed to sing low. And so for a long time, it was the coordination itself between the registrations that was off and making me feel like I had two different voices. I was like, I don't know how to unite these in the middle. In working with my own students, I think regional disparities can have a lot to do with it as well. So depending on the student, right? I think some students benefit from listening to other singers, or, if there are vocabulary terms that I'm using, if I want to be able to say, this is the term that I'm using to get to this goal with you, here's an example of someone doing that. So they're not just always hearing my voice all the time too. I do think that some students benefit from that. There are other students who I'll tell them not to listen to anyone. Like, don't go on YouTube, don't go on Spotify, don't look this up, because in this moment, I want to give you the freedom to play, like Jonathan was saying. And I spend a lot of time in lessons just having them make sounds out of the context of the music. Like, forget sounding pretty, forget what you want it to sound like. Let's just make a sound. Like, let's just see what your voice does at all the ends of the spectrum. Like, let's just play with the instrument itself, and getting them to think of it like an instrument outside of their body. Because I think as singers, we internalize so much of what we're supposed to do and what we're not supposed to sound like, and this, that, and the other. And so I think it's helpful sometimes to just step back and think of the voice like an instrument that is allowed to have extended techniques, and to play around with those sounds and see what those different colors are, and then put them back into context. And then doing a lot of, what did that feel like Tara was saying, so that in the moments when they're practicing on their own, it's not me being the one to say, that was it. That was correct. You did it 100%. I want them to be able to recognize, because I'm always saying to them, don't recreate the sounds, recreate the sensation, right? So when it comes to something where you felt like you were on the breath, or it felt like the vowel was the vowel that you intended, like I'm telling them to record themselves or recreate sensations. So just recognizing the voice outside of the human aspect of it. And then I will also say sometimes it is about the humanness, right? Like you guys talked about that emotional connection, which I love. For me, I'm a huge text person. Like, that's just how I connect to things. A lot of times I'll choose to sing something just never having heard it, but I read the poetry and I'm like, oh, that gets me. I connect to that. I want to sing this. And so just allowing people the opportunity to bring their experiences to that text. Like, I spend a lot of time breaking down translations, or even if it's in English, asking them, what does this text mean to you? Have you ever had a situation that's similar to this? How can you endow this song with your own personal experiences and bring that to the table so that they are able to start making those emotional connections to what they're doing in the music? Because I think that opens up another world of color and possibility as well.
Yeah, I love the fact that you brought that up because that's another area. And again, I hadn't thought of this before, but that's another one of those areas where too often we are taught this is the one right way to interpret this particular piece of music. And this is exactly the way you need to be thinking about this. And if you can't identify with any piece of whatever I just prescribed, well, then you don't have enough life experience or something. And that, I think it's really important to counteract that message because regardless of what life experiences we have had, we can all bring our own brand of specificity to whatever music we get and whatever music we are currently singing. And in that context, there are going to be certain things that we as artists need to feel the freedom to say, you know what? I am not connecting with this right now. I'm going to put this aside. Yes, I know this is standard rep, but I'm not going to force something that's not coming naturally, however we want to define that term naturally. But I'm not going to try to force something that I don't have inside of me right now. So we're getting close to the hour mark here. We've covered a lot of ground with this. There's so much more that we could cover, but I want to give each of you guys the opportunity to just give an encouragement to our listeners. This is what we did the last time. Give an encouragement to our listeners. What do you guys each wish that you had heard way earlier or even before you'd started singing that you feel like if you had been able to internalize it at that point would have made your journey more easy, would have helped you to stay connected with your own instincts and would have helped you to nurture your inner artist even while drilling the technique, which we all need to do. So, Tara, let's start with you.
So mine would be really, really simple. It's okay to be different. Like, it's okay to have a different voice. It's okay to sing the different repertoire. It's okay that your voice doesn't fit, that you don't want to sing Bach. Like, that's okay. It's okay to choose differently, and it's okay to market yourself that way. I find for myself that, just even within the last 3 years, just really embracing the idea that I can be different, and that is my superpower. And that is everyone's superpower, right? Like, being unique is your superpower. Your voice is unique. Everyone's voice is unique. So use it and just going for that. So that's what I would say, is just continue to find what is different and play with it and go for it.
Jonathan, what do you have to say on the subject?
I think for me would have been, you can sing whatever you want. Even if I'm trying to study classically and stuff. Later on in my studies, I was encouraged to sing, but at first, being almost given a tunnel vision of what I was supposed to do, kind of inhibited my ability to access the freedom of my voice. So yes, sing whatever you want, I think is a very freeing concept.
Very cool. Shanelle, what is your encouragement to the younger version of yourself out there?
Mine would be that as a singer, you have more agency than you realize. I don't think that I realized I could be in control of how I was using my voice or, what type of repertoire I was singing until I got much older. And it's something that I, in hindsight, have tried to apply to my studio. I realized that, as a professional, I have the ability to say, no, I'm going to take that gig, or, no, I'm not going to take that gig, or yes, that sounds like something I would be interested in. And I think, and maybe this is a separate conversation, right? But I think in the American system of training, it's so often like you have to do this, and this. And sometimes maybe that's not really the best option for every individual involved. And so we tend to like force a lot of things upon students, I think, that are coming through those systems. But in the private setting, I've been able to more so say, like, is this something that you want to do? Like, you have a choice. It's your body, your instrument. Like, you tell me, like, you help me guide this process with you so that it's not a dictatorship. So I think earlier on, students need to be aware of their agency and the progression of their own journeys, and having the ability to say no or yes, or that's uncomfortable, or feeling comfortable to question things, and to say, like, hey, maybe that doesn't feel quite right. Can you explain that to me another way? Like, just advocating for yourself a lot sooner.
Yeah. On that note, I think that, and I'm just going to join in this game here. I would tell my younger self to keep the agency that I had, because I had kind of the reverse experience of a lot of people where and part of it was I was not studying. I did not have voice declared as a major. So, but I was in a small department and I was able to sing and audition along with everyone else. But I only chose to do it when A, I felt wanted, and B, I wanted it. So I would tell my younger self, you are doing the exact right thing there. You don't need to, in the name of professionalism, go out for every gig or every audition or force yourself to sing everything just because you could theoretically do it well. To take time to figure out what it is that you specifically want to do, and also know that others' approval, the industry's approval of you or disapproval of you, is not what determines whether or not you're a good singer. Because for so long I had absorbed the lie that, well, if I wasn't getting hired, then there must be something wrong with me. Or I must be doing something technically wrong. And realizing that there's so much left to subjective, what does this person want to see in this role? And a whole slew of other political things that are all their own episode. But I think I will wrap that up there. What I hear you guys saying just in general is, as singers, we go after the sound that feels good, the sound that feels the most natural in our bodies. And as scary and as vulnerable as that is the piece of ourselves that we very uniquely have to bring to the opera world. And all of our technique should aim at bringing that to the world as opposed to doing something technical. So with that, I think I'm going to close this out for today. Thank you guys so much for being here, for having this conversation with me. We will have your information, your contact information in the description for this episode when it comes out. And with that, I will say I'm Karen Wilcox. You've been listening to Affirming Infinity, and thank you so much for coming and being with us today. And thank you so much, Shanelle, Jonathan, and Tara, for contributing. All right. I will see you guys later. Bye.